And welcome to the Coffee Club. We have a full house for the first time this year. Eric, Rebecca, and myself, as usual, and Saahil has returned from the paralysis of backs, and Michael Casey's also joined us on the line. So welcome. We had a warm-up chat, and for once we were drowning in potential topics, and then we got to the end and went, well, I wonder if we'll get to any of them, because as usual, we start with highlights of the week. And I'm going to throw to Saahil. Highlights of your week, Saahil.
Oh man. I think two things jump out at me as highlights of the week so far. One is someone asked me if I had to describe the um, sort of life cycle of a feature, right? If I had to explain the process from idea conception to delivery, but from the features perspective, how would I describe it, and what would that look like? Who are the people it would see along the way? And that was just a really fun thought exercise for me to sit down and think about. Okay, well, we always talk about it in the perspective of here's the work and how it breaks down, but I don't know, writing it that way and discussing it from a, well, these are the people that might pop in early, and then at that point all you might have is an idea, and then suddenly there's a lot more detail, and these are the people shaping the acceptance criteria. I don't know. It was a really fun conversation, and it stuck in my brain for a while. I thought about it for a couple hours after it was over. And so I have some intent or desire to put pen to paper and actually document that somewhere. Um,
I, I'm picturing taking that script and feeding it into the new OpenAI realistic video generator and like the animated life of a feature.
that
No,
that would be really cool. That is something I never would have thought of, Mark, but now I kind of want to do
so
it.
you just so what you just described is the inside view of a value stream. This is like what it's like to be in your value stream. Whoosh, and it's like all the different people and everything that you see as you whip through. Because that's actually one of my facilitation techniques for doing value stream mapping, is be the work item and walk it through the system.
And
So
now I've got
I've definitely done that before, like what teams would touch this feature as we walk through a value stream. But I don't know, it was weird, like, because at one point I used the phrase "the epic gives birth to the feature," and it just put this image in my brain that like yeah, I don't know. I literally was like, and then there's the feature's mom, right? And you just got to make sure, like, it was a really really fun conversation. Um,
There's a whole thing
so that was
about
probably
how a feature's cousins can get in the way, and if you have too many cousins, you got a problem.
so,
Because dependencies go out of control.
I'm picturing a kayak on a river. And it's on this journey, and is it encountering smooth flow down the river or navigating the rapids?
I like your kayak visual much better than the birthing or the many cousins visual. So thanks, Mark. Appreciate you.
man. Well, I think the if we can add some, like, I don't know, crocodiles to the river, then I'm a little bit more on board, because the rapids alone don't represent all the people that get into the way of feature flow.
You know what? A small point of interest when you mentioned the kayaking. Alan Ward used to use the kayak metaphor when it came to talking about flow all the time, and the reason he used that metaphor was because when you're in a kayak, you got to be very agile. That other words, nimble, responsive, adaptive. Just like pointing the kayak and thinking you're going to get where you need to be is not what we need to be doing in this business. So it's just kind of interesting how that sort of picture popped out of a fun conversation. And when you mentioned birthing, James Herriot, it shouldn't happen to a vet, immediately popped into my mind. So I also like the kayak metaphor a lot more.
Yeah, well, I did say it was a very, evocative image in my head. But yeah, that's my highlight of the week so far is
Kayaks and cousins. Over to you, Michael. What was your highlight?
Is it okay to have two? I kind of have two competing highlights.
You can have two.
I'll take half the time to describe them. And one of them was I had a really interesting conversation with another person who's on the SPCT journey about innovation and how it pertains to SAFE and the opportunities, which really are there in the framework to call out that SAFE makes an awful lot possible here that we know we need in organizations. The other one was a little bit more in the space of learning. I've started to get pretty deep into machine learning, AI, and then a couple of tangents coming off of that. I've gotten into data science as a topic all by itself. And then I've gone pretty deep into the underlying math that you really need to know to understand this problem space well. And the reason it's a highlight is because I'm feeling mentally nourished by all of these like steep learning curves now to march them. And I feel like I'm making good progress and I'm enjoying it enormously. So that's where just about every free moment at the moment is going into that space. So those are my two highlights.
Cool.
I just want to throw out there that as a former data scientist, I love hearing people getting more interested in data science. And if you ever just want to talk about that sometime, I'm happy to have that conversation.
I do. I very much do. I appreciate the invite. You are going to get taken up on that because
Awesome.
I've probably dropped about, I don't know, $300-400 on books in the last week or two, in this area, and some of them are fabulous, some of them aren't, and I'll take everything I get from the point of view of guidance and insights into this space.
Nice. Eric, I'm going to prompt since we've got 5 people on the line.
That's probably wise. I think the highlight of my week was waking up on the beach yesterday morning and finding a new camping spot that we're completely in love with. And then beyond that, it was just having a productive week of creation last week and getting to where like I'm happy with the handouts and the things I'm building and playing with branding and backgrounds and all kinds of fun stuff. So just really enjoying the flow I'm in right now. But I think waking
you
up on
woke
the beach is the highlight.
and you then found a camping spot, or because you happened to wake up on the beach, you decided that that's a camping spot?
We went to a new stretch of beach to camp. And
not like you fell asleep accidentally.
And on our way there was a unexpected encounter with a off-road race.
Ooh.
With large trucks flying across the road at various angles and intersections, luckily mostly flagged until we got close to the beach. And then we're driving up the final stretch and we hear some like whistling and yelling off to the side, and we like look over and they're like pushing us to the side of the road. So we go over, and then big old monster truck comes flying over the hill past us. So that got exciting and spicy for a moment. And then we went and found the actual beach area, and we're like, oh, it's really busy. Everybody's here for the race. So let's explore a little bit. And we found then a more hidden spot further up the beach that's protected from wind and has like full sweeping views of both sunset and sunrise. And it was like our new favorite spot.
Nice.
So, and it has enough parking space and tent space that we could probably bring like 2 or 3 other couples worth of friends and have plenty of room. So it's kind of perfect.
You probably could have set up a tent underneath the monster truck, and then you'd be perfectly safe from the other monster trucks.
The spot that he had for his tent, though, was just gorgeous. I saw the photo this morning, and I was just like, yes. And then I remembered that over Easter I'm going on another paddleboard camping trip, and I too will be finding lovely places to pitch it.
Yes, I put it in the back channel for you all, but people on the stream don't get to see it unless Mark has some creative magic on how to share it.
I might get distracted while Eric shares. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Rebecca shares
Well,
highlights.
It is very pretty.
Rebecca, what were your highlights?
Probably too many of them, so I'm going to try to select. It was a fantastic week. So lots of brain sharing at work, which was really, really fun. Watching my teammates use goat emojis that I'd created and dancing them across the screen was also really fun. But I think the highlight, my step kiddo turned 10 and started teaching her woodworking over the weekend, which she was really into. So watching her use power tools for the first time was both terrifying and really fun. and have the joy of, you know, creating something with your own hands rather than creating the next YouTube channel or whatever. So that was probably my highlight, and just a lot of fun reading that I've been doing in general.
Anything in particular you've been reading that's inspiring you right now?
The Cleric Quintet is really fun and inspiring some of my D&D games.
That was one of my favorite classics growing up. I remember how much I got into that as a kid.
I didn't remember that I read it until my husband started reading it and was like, "You should read this." And then I looked at my Kindle and was like, "I already have, but I'm going to read it again." So my D&D crew right now is pretty fun, so it's helping out.
Yes, I've been.
Is that the one with Danica the monk?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And Scatterly.
Mhm.
Yep. Book recommendations all over the place, people.
My son is mad keen on his D&D and DMing, and he's forever hunting for people who'll commit properly to a campaign and want to role play instead of roll dice. And he's managed to gather a crew recently, so he's been off creating campaigns and 3D printing models for the table.
Yeah.
And he's got like this city for the campaign, and he's running these 18-hour prints for modular components of the city to create the environment. It's hilarious.
Yeah, the group I've got right now is more seriously into the role playing than previous groups. Previous groups have been more into the roll and kill part, which is also what I like, but this is fine too.
We learn new things about you every time, Rebecca.
Hobbies are important.
So I would have taken you for a role player, not a roll and kill person, but
Oh no, I just want to murder it all.
fair enough.
Doesn't matter what character I have. If I'm a cleric or a priest, I still am just a murder hobo.
So I had lots of time to think about my highlights. I think I have a combo highlight and low light. So the highlight would be the sessions Eric and I have been having prepping for our Lean Portfolio Management podcast. And we took an approach to go, yeah, we know roughly what we want in the first 6 episodes. We've got a few post-its as prompters for each. Instead of doing a detailed kind of structure layout, we're just going to get together, start talking, hit record, see what happens, and then go back and digest the notes. And then take a second pass with, the benefit of the first pass to tell us some of the topics and the order we should tackle them in. And we decided to do all 6 episodes before we went back to record the first real one. And they have been absolutely fascinating, fun explorations. And there's been the exploration where we set out for a topic we thought would fit in an hour, and we talked about half the topic in 2 hours. That was, of course, Zone to Win and portfolio management. We were planning to blend it with your Zone to Win plus Your Strategy Needs a Strategy in Lean Portfolio Management. But, we were 2 hours in by the time we got through Zone to Win. But that's been really interesting, just kind of the brain stretch and finding some of the ideas that emerged and the key concepts that perhaps we would have loved to talk about in episode 1, but they only really came clear for us by episode 3 or 4. But now, because it's just a drafting process, we get the benefit of hindsight. So that's been really enjoyable. The low light was prepping to upload them all to Fireflies last night to generate the transcript so we can start doing our analysis together, and discovering that I messed up the record button on one of them. And so we have an hour of both of our mouths moving with no sound.
No.
And then Eric discovered that I'd messed up another record button on a different video, and all we had was my voice. So that's going to be a really interesting transcript to listen to, because it's only got half the conversation. But
Are you sure that wasn't just like really smart AI being like, what Eric said was...
Well, it was one of the ones about the portfolio examples, wasn't it, Eric?
I think it just understood that we shouldn't be talking about what's in my Berlin talk until people actually show up in Berlin. That was what the AI was doing, is protecting my future. Yeah. That's it.
Brilliant.
But that's also, it's been part of.
Fine, we'll
Sorry,
come.
go Saahil.
Sorry, I was just joking.
Ah.
I was just joking, saying Eric can bully us into coming to his talk in Berlin. That's fine.
Well, it's part of the thinking we had with it was to go, when we talk in Berlin, it's a small time slot where every minute is precious. And it'll be nice to be able to go, hey, if you're interested in the last 3 minutes, here's a podcast that actually spent 20 minutes on it as a deep dive. But the other aspect was to go, these explorations are part of figuring out exactly how we want to tell the story in Berlin. And through that lens, they've been really good. I don't think my story outline's changed, but the places I'm going to take it in terms of some of the language and the key concepts have really been impacted in a good way. So, the new style of pairing. So what do you know? We got through highlights of your week and we didn't get horrendously distracted and we get to pick one of our topics. I'm going to suggest we open sustainability. For anybody who's curious about topics, we run a channel in our Discord where we go, what do we feel like talking about? People throw up ideas and we go, do we feel like talking about that? Maybe not. And then we have an option list. And Rebecca threw one out today, which was sustainability. And I just saw sustainability and I went, yeah, I'd love to talk about sustainability. And for mine, it was like instant wiring was sustainability and change. And then I read the full comment from Rebecca, which was sustainability and product development. I was like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, we can talk about that, but I'm interested in sustainability about change. And then while we were warming up to hit the go live button, Saahil was like, yeah, sustainability and transformation. So goodness knows where we'll go. But I'm going to throw to Rebecca first to go, what was in your head when you said, I want to talk about sustainability?
I mean, I think all of those paths that you kind of walk through really fast have been part of a lot of thinking I've been doing for work and not for work for the last 8 months. So everything from, to your point, like how do you have a sustainable transformation, to what does sustainability really mean throughout the world in different regions. And what I found really fascinating is, especially when it comes to product development in particular, there's so many ways that people can define the word. And when you think in the framework right now, sustainable is around the solution box as one of the things to consider. And so considering like what are all the different ways that you could take that word choice and how can it drive you to really drive a better product overall, deliver a better product overall, from any definition that you might have of the word, has been really fun for me to get to think through and think deeper about. Everything from, sustainable in the idea of longevity, to sustainable in the idea of profit, to environmental impact, to resource efficiency, to circular economy, to social responsibility. Those are all ways of considering sustainability. And when you are thinking about a product and product management and product delivery, every one of those definitions does really matter. So how do you tie all that together?
That's actually a really interesting lens. So I
Thanks.
went through, and I'll chuck some extra bits in. I went through a process, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, where I've always been a desirability, viability, feasibility guy, or DVF, right? It's a nice short acronym. And coaching into product management, I've always loved the 3 lenses of thinking. And SAFE snuck in sustainability somewhere to the definition. I forget at which version it started out as DVF. And it always kind of did my head in, because the questions and SAFE of talks about, cost to serve, can we sustain it in market? as the sustainable definition, which for me had always been part of viability. And so I'd gone backwards and forwards. I go, whenever I'm talking at a whiteboard, my own slide, I just use desirability, viability, feasibility. And if I'm using a safe slide, I have to talk about sustainability. And so I'd gone backwards and forwards, and I went through a process of going, is this something you guys made up, or has it been a general industry evolution? Discovered it is a general industry evolution. You didn't just make it up. But I've gone backwards and forwards as much as anything else, because I'd love a 3-part model is less complex for somebody to get their head around than a 4-part model. And I'm like, should I rewire my brain to think in terms of the 4-part lens? But then when you started talking, Rebecca, I thought sustainability. Today, when I hear sustainability, I hear environmental sustainability and social responsibility. Just what does the word come to mean? And that gets really interesting in terms of saying, should that be a top tier lever of consideration for every product we think of?
Yeah, and what I'm finding is I do think it's still also connected to economics. I mean, the companies that I see that are doing a really good job with sustainable product development, more so than announcing to my shareholders that I will do something that is good for the world, but are actually doing something innovative and different. They're pulling in their value, like they're using value delivery, value creation just more holistically in a way that I think every product manager really should. Not only because like should in the term of it's good for the world, but it's good for your business to think about not just the part of the development process that is developing and the flow within it, but like how do your users recycle their products? Like where's the waste going there? Can you get some of that waste back and do reusable things with it? I mean, if you think about like just the simpleness of Amazon, when you need to return something, you don't actually have to go buy a new package. You can just undo the little sticky thing and put your whatever you bought back in the same package and send it back. That saves everybody money and it's healthier for the earth. So I think that whole tied concept of whether it's physical design or web design, what can we do to really focus on the most critical product path, the most sustainable designs for our end users and for our profits? I think it does all connect and it ends up making the world better by the way as well while you're making profit.
If
So
I could,
if I can
permit you-
offer, go ahead, Michael.
no, I apologize. You go ahead, sir.
We could hit a wall just being polite to each other. So I'm gonna go, but I
So I'm
want you
gonna
to know
jump
that I
in
wish
now.
you had just no. So if I could offer like a little bit of a case study about what Rebecca was just talking about, there was an organization that I was working with last year, and I think some of you on this call were kind of coaching me through that as I was approaching this organization a little bit differently than I had worked with previous clients in the past, because they were looking at bringing someone in full time to build a transformation organization dedicated to environmental sustainability. They said, we want to use technology in our company to support one of our corporate missions, which is environmental sustainability. This is a company that I imagine all of you are familiar with, but they live it in their identity. The founder was a big conservationist and environmentalist, and it's one of their core missions. And so one of the things that I worked with them on was adopting a modified form of weighted shortest job first, where we added another category other than business value, time criticality, and risk reduction. We added a 4th category, which was, we called it mission enablement, but they were specifically looking at, for every feature in Epic they were prioritizing, how much does it support our environmental mission? And so that was given equal weight to everything else in terms of business value and risk reduction from a profit perspective or a product perspective. As they said, hey, we want to be prioritizing technology features that we believe will support our organization internally and our mission to be more sustainable. And so some of those were things like product buybacks. There was a whole epic around that. And then, there was also awareness initiatives and epics that they were doing around branding and product differentiation. I can't really be more specific than that, but I do think that's almost exactly what Rebecca was just talking about. And it's something that, it wasn't cheap, it wasn't free. The organization really had to live with their commitment to this and spend some money on it, but they were able to do it and adopt that approach.
Yeah, what I find is that, and I don't know if you found this too, but what I find is a lot of the organizations that are actually like taking this seriously, it's not just like I want to that I'm spending money on this. Like if when you think about it from a holistic perspective, even if you look at like our solution context article that talks about system of systems, interoperability with other solutions, how you support your infrastructure, what happens maintenance and operational support. Those are all things that people should be considering. And maybe they're getting left by the wayside because there's not a concentration focus on it. And I think when you put an environmental light on it, you are actually forced healthily into looking at your entire solution context that you're a part of from a very holistic perspective. And that in the end is going to make a less wasteful financially as well as worldly and better off for the world and better off for your long-term profits than you would have done otherwise. Whether or not the reason that you started to do it is environmental or if it's just the right way to build a product. And I'm hoping to try to like tie those things closer together because I don't think it's just like you should spend all this money on doing this. It's actually just a healthier longevity point of view for product building.
Um, I agree with everything you said. I wanna preface that because I'm about to say something that I don't agree with. But
Sure.
I imagine that people would take you up on the right way to build a product in what you just described, because the mentality for, the last century or more has been as cheaply as possible, right? That's the right way to build a product. And maybe I don't mean so look, we can talk about waste dumping and all of the ways people have cut corners around emissions and giving kids cancer in schools because of their manufacturing plants. Like, they will have always put profit over what we would consider today the right way of doing things. And so I think that while we might all make a fundamental assumption about what that is, I don't know that the market totally agrees with us yet.
I think it depends on the market and also your point in time. I grew up in a family that owned a steel company. And that steel company, from the time I was 10, I went to board meetings where we talked about the system of our community that we served. And although our product was steel, the system of our community was the small cities that we lived in where the workers came from. And so we spent money on making sure that workers' children could get to school so that workers could get to work. That is a long-term profitability business decision that happens to be also really good for your community. And I think a lot of organizations that think in the long term versus in the short term do think in those ways. There are also a lot of companies that think in the short term, and I think they have short term lives because of it.
So I- I'm just going to clarify one thing, and then I know Michael's been very patient after being very polite.
Sorry.
So, Saahil, I know you can't mention the name of the company, but if I guessed it was European, would it be a fair guess?
No, they're based in California.
Ah, there you go. 'Cause I think that was one of the things that really struck me last year in Prague was there was no company that was going to get on stage and share a story that wasn't going to have environment and sustainability at the center of the story.
I think Europe is way ahead of us in that game, and I'm
Yeah.
very, very jealous of that operating environment, to be totally transparent with you, because I've been very passionately beating my drum about the need for more environment, sustainable transformation, sustainable product development. And it's just, oh, that's the crazy millennial talking. Doesn't understand that we're trying to maximize revenue for our shareholders. Right? But I would argue, just like Rebecca said, I'm trying to take a long-term view here.
All right.
All right.
So, Michael, you've been very patient. Can you still remember what you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, but I'm going to stay with this thread just for a moment or two because you all got me thinking. I do feel generalization coming up, and they're always dangerous, of course, but here comes one. I do feel that we're building the world in which we would like to live with the choices we make. So, and I'm going to include myself here at the front of the line. When I go and buy a product or invest in a service, how much do I know about the organization that sits behind it? Probably not enough. If I would go out on a limb and say, right, there's a lot of easy choices to make. We're all busy. We'd like to try to do the right thing, but at the same time, we've got crazy full days with families and concerns and so on. So what do? You go to the nearest store and you grab something on the shelf for dinner that night. And inadvertently, you may have supported some of this not so great shorter term behavior, perhaps. So I don't want to overlabor the point, but I don't think we're as informed as we would perhaps like to be to try to make better decisions about where we're doing our shopping and where we're doing our purchasing, if I'm really honest. So, and I'll remind myself of what I was going to put out there a little earlier. Back to sustainability. What strikes me as interesting is how companies, organizations, they can build a product. They will often build a product that we know is not likely to be sustainable. And this sort of positioning the teams to design for reuse. You brought that up earlier, Rebecca. If we want reuse, well, reuse does come at a price. It's not free. Elegant designs which are going to be loosely coupled so that we can plug things in and out in the future. Maybe we can harvest parts down the line. These are really important concerns. And I think, what's interesting to me is we're back to this short-term versus long-term perspective, but looking through yet a different lens about this. And do organizations have that discipline to slow down, to say, no, this is not the right thing to be doing. We're going to change direction. We may go to market later. It's going to hurt in the short term, but it's going to pay us off in the longer term. In other words, not build that monolith, not allow that monolith to evolve. And I'm very interested in that. How does that happen? How does it come about? Are there signs? Are there things that we can detect? Are there, remember that term? It's pretty old now, but coach smells was a popular term for a while. Like, do we have product equivalences? Or maybe in our value streams, do we have similar things that we can detect? Like we're sliding one day at a time into this world where there's a good chance what we're building here is not, in fact, going to be sustainable, and here's why. So that was my thought. Just curious for anybody else's thoughts in that space.
I know we have Eric's space because his mouth moves slightly, which makes me think he has something to say. But
no, I'm just toying with the difference of sufficiently short term. And I'm thinking companies that don't already have a large product portfolio. So thinking earlier stage companies, ones with 1 or 2 products in the market. And the conversation there about a product that is sufficiently viable to be worth doing in the short term versus this multi-generational long-term community-based thinking, and some of the tensions that pop up there start to come to mind. Because if I look at viability, unless I'm a very well capitalized company, I probably have to get my product to profitability or sufficiently interesting to get a whole bunch of investors within a year or so, plus or minus 6 months, and to full profitability regardless of my investment profile within 5 to 7 years. Because we've watched the life cycle of companies that never make a profit as the market is having less and less patience with them, even if they're very well invested. So if I compared that with this desire to create long-term economics and the fact that often those things do cost more upfront, but create much longer sustainable products in many cases, and it's not uniform, and I can come up with many exceptions to what I just said. I see a tension there. It's like, how do we get to demonstrating we have a viable, profitable product, especially if we're doing MVP thinking and lots of iteration? And the sirens called it that leads you away from the sustainability conversation, distracts you in a deep way. And
So-
I'm thinking about the culture of what Rebecca was talking about that needs to be in place to allow that to happen reliably then, to get to the sustainable as well.
So
I haven't.
go,
Sorry,
Rebecca.
go ahead, Mark.
Okay. There's two lenses now, and my brain's wearing on both fronts, right? Because I've got environmental sustainability and I've got technical sustainability. And although there's some commonalities, there's also some differences. And if I thought about, product strategy and environmental sustainability, and particularly to Eric's point about, do you have the time to invest in that way, particularly early portfolio? I think this starts to become an interesting question through a product strategy lens of, the market segments you chase.
hmm
Because in any society at the moment, there are more and more segments that are factoring environmental considerations into their buying choices. And there's a piece of this which is, I don't think I've ever seen a marketing segmentation study in Australia, or one that I've read in the US, that thinks about environmental consciousness as a particularly high factor in segmentation options. But if you think about it as a skill for a product manager, you could go, okay, well, segment environmental awareness, and there's probably a whole bunch of factors that you might segment into environmental awareness that allow you to target your early cohorts, particularly if you're thinking, down a disruptive quality cycle, find product market fit with your environmentally folks, and then eventually as you get to scale and you're sort of moving further into the life cycle, you can start to take it out to people who are less influenced by environmental consciousness, but you've built your sustainable economics with people who are.
Yeah. Well, and you're right. You're right down the thought process of what I've seen really coming out strongly to not the problem case that you're stating, Eric, but like the really solution state from UX designers of if your market, like A, like think about what market you're hitting. B, there's really simple things that you can do that to me you should be doing anyway. And from a societal or from an economic or from an environmental perspective, like just being really mindful of how heavy your content is. So from a web perspective, the heavier content you have, if you don't have dark mode, those things have environmental waste. They're spending more energy than you need to, and they're not a great user experience. So I do think that there's a Venn diagram across all of these pieces. If you're trying to create a healthcare app to be used in underprivileged areas, you shouldn't be spending money on custom fonts that people can't use on their devices. We should shift our perspective to design for our least privileged users, which also ends up resulting in cost reduction. And it's the right thing to do for the market segments that you're trying to hit in that case. Using your images more efficiently, reducing your file size also reduces energy use. So all these things, I think they impact society, like your end user experience better. They also end up reducing your costs and they help the environment. And I think when you find like that sweet spot in the middle, you can MVP as rapidly as you want to in most cases, and you're doing it with a focus. Like respect your technology budgets is one of them. Respect your data budgets. Don't go over all the time because you think that some sort of big hit might happen. Give yourself a budget and stick to it. And to me, these are all good practices that are in product anyhow, but people aren't necessarily doing them, and then they're ending up building a bunch of stuff no one actually needs or desires. And when you look at the really long term of your MVPs out there, are people ending at a stage like they've done their jobs to be done, and you still build like four more parts of their journey that they don't actually need? And do you ever like look at that so that you can get rid of it, and then that's less cost to your business and it's less energy waste on the internet. So I think it all plays well really nicely together, actually.
There's an element there about patience, though. So I found myself, I caught up with an old friend for lunch last week, and we wound up talking about Manifesto for a Moral Revolution. And if you want to think about environmentally sustainable products, you can't go past the work of those folks. And one of the phrases that really just has sat with me ever since Eric made me read the book was patient capital. And the emphasis that turned up in case study after case study after case study, that they held a long time before they scaled. And everything they did had a huge, I don't think she gave an example that didn't have a community and environment sustainability question. But she spun for a long time, and their coaching guidance they gave these organizations trying to do this work sat for a long time in find great product market fit that we can actually sustainably scale. And the general tension there, I think, is most companies want to scale fast. I mean, she talked about it really well in terms of finance. She went, the big challenge with, finance for these people is finance wants to scale fast, but then you're potentially scaling the wrong thing. And there's a huge sustainable consideration that, I reckon.
It's a complete tangent and a story for another time, Mark, but a reminder, I want to tell you the story I bumped into during my Christmas camping, a couple who had just come back from working somewhere in Africa, and both of them had worked for companies in that portfolio.
Oh my goodness, yes. Okay.
So I got to hear some of the on the ground on the other side of that, but not relevant for this conversation. Anyway, go ahead, Rebecca.
I feel like I talked a lot, so if there's other thoughts, I'd love to hear them.
So maybe as an incremental.
Okay, Michael. I was just thinking we hadn't come back to you since we started responding to you.
Listening to Rebecca, I mean, it felt an awful lot of what you said resonated with me. It felt a lot of what you were saying kept coming back to this customer centricity question. Are you building the right thing for the right people at the right time? And I think the thought I had was the need to. It's not a cost; it's an investment. To invest in having that clarity around what are we doing, why are we doing it. For instance, persona creation. Like so many companies skip it. We all read it, and this is what we're supposed to be doing. And then, after a couple of weeks of like noble efforts, before you know it, we're back to as a user in backlogs and so on, regardless of what level it's at, some equivalency of a generic, of course, it's obvious it should be valuable. But I think you just made me think a lot more about this, the need to invest carefully up front to bring to the equation this clarity about who are we building this for. If you're building it for a certain kind of person who's not necessarily, well in a good financial situation to go and buy, for instance, the latest iPads, don't go investing in down those lines and building costs for the company. And it's back to this sustainability question. And I realize I like what you said. I gave me a lot to think about. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm glad it's connecting. Because in my head, I see all these like the way to get this done is to go back to the basics of what you should be doing all along, and for whatever reason becomes so hard that because you could build anything, and so it's like fun and shiny to build anything, and you could describe anything as valuable, but that's not the discipline that you need, and that's not the discipline your the world needs. So
can I kill controversy for a second? Maybe it's more like devil's advocate here, but just something I'd be curious to explore is an awful lot of what what is being said at the moment is, and I don't mean anything facetious by this word, but it is noble. There's a lot of noble ideas. There's a lot of noble thinking, the much better thinking, back to Sahil's earlier point, than possibly we've had for 100 years or so.
Hmm.
But what guidance do we have out there, or what understanding do we have with like just how far might we go with this? If you're in a place where you are front and center, you're already in the business of trying to, for instance, set up a better financial system in Africa, perhaps, or some part of the world that doesn't have one. And there's an awful lot of value and benefit to people who deserve to have that. Well, that's a great place to be. What about other companies who are in this very tricky area of trying to manage these trade-offs? They've got very demanding investors. They've got like hungry leadership in some cases to go and do something fast. Back to Eric's point. I don't know that I'm not sure there's some sort of that I haven't seen at least great material on how to get into this, like a compromise. What's the balance between, yes, we have to be profitable. Yes, we'd better start having some revenue coming in. Would also like to be sustainable. It's very important we don't harm the environment, for instance. Has anyone encountered good either guidance, case studies, material here for? I'm thinking of the big companies like GE, the big airline companies, the big automobile manufacturers, and so on. How do they manage this trade-off?
I mean, two things. One, I mean, I'm obviously doing all this research because I need to write guidance. So hopefully there will be some more clear guidance coming out soon. But as I've been doing research, I really liked Sundar at Google had a really good quote in his Sustainable with Google 2023 presentation about most of society's complex challenges don't get solved with a single data source. And I think in today's world, they also don't get solved with a single organization. And they've done a fantastic job of partnering to solve really tough things, like partnering with some of the largest, uh, air companies, like plane companies and airlines in the world to do things with AI that put technology in the hand of a pilot, so that the pilot can make the decisions about, is the wind pushing me against me or behind me at the moment, and therefore I get better fuel efficiency and therefore I have less carbon impact. And that's a partnership, all the way to let's give the simplest technology possible into the hands of fishermen who make their living for their small villages in high floodplain areas. We have the data as Google to show, like, hey, there is weather coming in which you will not be able, you're going to drown if you keep fishing, while you also need to feed your village. And so let's get you the data that you need at the time that you need it. And in my opinion, and from everything I see, empowering these large companies that to continue to innovate and to continue to partner across and to enable as much as possible them to not be hindered by too much regulation so that they can partner, is where I'm seeing the highest innovation. When I'm watching areas that are so highly regulated that you're not really allowed to partner or pair or share data, I see less innovation. So I think it's everything from like making the use case that this actually is profitable, and this is why it's profitable for your long term, which I'm hoping to drive that point home, all the way to these really big world problems require innovation from some of the most profitable organizations. They're ready to do it. They're hungry to do it. Let's unlock them to do so. That's kind of the future I see and hope for.
And that would
Thoughts
bring
on the role of government to set some standards, set some rules and constraints that we can all agree upon.
Well, it's
I
both
don't mean
sides.
to
Rules and constraints and the flexibility to innovate. Because in some of the countries that take it the most, take most seriously, thou shalt be environmentally good, it's also not very comfortable to be an organization who wants to innovate.
I think there's a thread, and what I loved about some of the examples you gave through a customer experience perspective, Rebecca, was and you just reinforced, right? The linking of the fact that you can find commercial drivers that go alongside sustainability. And, there's one thing, and when you started this question, Michael, I went, well, the first thing you've got is, as a coach, you can't tell someone to be environmentally sustainable, right? Because that's a choice a company makes. But
Right.
I've certainly met a lot of companies who had slogans about environmental sustainability, but they had not found any way to bring it to life practically, right? There was some little office or some side investments in sustainable innovation or something else, but it wasn't part of the heart and soul of the company. And I think that thread, and I love Saahil's example of, add another lever to cost of delay, or add some thinking to your product strategy and your market segmentation, or find the drivers where you can link being more environmentally conscious to also generating commercial impacts. Because that's that opportunity, I think, for a company that says we want to be more environmentally conscious, to be down, coaching in the rank and file or the people forming product strategy and going, how can you bring this to life in your product strategy? What are the tools? And I'm assuming this is where you're starting to head with your guidance, Rebecca. What are the tools that make it easy for somebody to go, I know how I can link the work I do to our company's aspirations with the environment?
I'm going to try to not give away my article too early, but I think that different organizations are going to have different things that they feel are really important. And one of the paths I'm trying to take is, no matter if your organization sees things more from an economic standpoint, or if they see things from a societal standpoint, or if they see something from an environmental standpoint or an ecological standpoint, or if they have any two out of those three or all three at once, there are methods to take to make sure that your product is a better longevity, feasibility, everything that's already in the solution box product. And there are methods that anybody can take that will march you towards any of those three things. If you are concentrating on all three things, then you can win even more. You're going to be long-term competitive even more. You're going to be viable even more. All those things. So I'm not finding that your company has to have this strong social pull to concentrate here. I'm finding that really focusing on solid product development, on solid design thinking, on prioritization, is going to start to naturally fulfill the areas, as long as you're actually thinking holistically about the system that your product is a part of.
I think there's still an element of, you have to care, right? Like, this is something that is never going to happen naturally unless you have people in the roles who care about these things, right? Even with great design thinking and customer centricity, if you're not thinking systems thinking, how am I impacting the environment? How am I impacting reusability? You're thinking, how am I impacting my suppliers? How am I impacting distribution? You're never going to come to the sustainable parts, right? So there has to be someone who's at least willing to extend that thought in that direction and see where it takes them. And I imagine it's probably easier to find individuals who are willing to think that way than it is to find companies.
I don't know. I'm not sure I'm sold on that part yet.
Well,
And partially, I really do believe the tenet that we all have, I think we all have, of like, assume positive intent. I think it's very easy to get distracted, but I actually do think companies, especially the really big ones, do understand their impact on on the world and on the markets and on society as a whole. And I think it was your point, Michael, they just don't they haven't found the path to get to the good that they know they could have. And I think that's what we get to offer people is there are these paths. There's a reason that you have such a big company that is hard to connect, and let's give you the connection pathways so that you can live the positive intent that you have rather than be burdened by your size.
I was reminded earlier, there's a tie-in here back to what for me is a very important part of the SAFE framework, which I think is underutilized, which is systems thinking.
Yeah,
And
it's all systems thinking.
yeah, and I like what's in there. I owe it to SAFE that I was even introduced to the subject, as I don't recall I was really aware of this space before I encountered the SAFE framework. But there's a lot more we could do in this space in terms of, that the critical nature of the feedback loops, and that broader picture, both whether it be an environmental perspective, sustainable perspective, economics perspective. I think some material on how those feedback loops play a role, because often companies are not really looking for them. I'm not sure they measure them well in terms of seeing the bigger picture. And before I hand it back to the room, as I was talking, I'm just reminded, because we talked about the fifth discipline late last year. Was it late last year or in the middle of last year? But that book, I mean, Peter Senge goes out on a limb and says, I think it's in his opinion that systems thinking is the discipline that's going to determine whether the human race continues or not, whether the human race is sustainable or not. So I just see there's a lot of opportunity there in exploring systems thinking in this broader topic area.
Well, if you look,
I'm thinking of getting the fun bracelet that says WWDD, what would Deming do? And just wear it all the time.
I was just going to say on the systems thinking front, if you actually look more deeply into systems thinking, an awful lot of the big case studies are weather and environment related. I remember that the first deep dive I did was my introduction to Weinberg in a very different style to his other books. And it was an introduction to general systems thinking. And literally the whole book was weather systems and environmental change. I spent the whole thing going, this is really interesting. And how do I make this work for software development?
You can do
My
it.
favorite systems thinking book from the point of view of environmental and sustainable perspectives. She may have more than one. I think it was Donatella Meadows. Quite a few years ago now that I read it, but she really good material there to sort of reset how we're thinking about the world that we're trying to continue to both live in and build.
I have
So
a couple
I
different.
think it is just based on a quick Google, Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows.
Nice.
and
Appreciate that.
Nice.
Thank you.
if you're being really proactive, Saahil, you'd now put a link to that in the chat.
Is an Amazon link okay?
That's what we've been doing. Yeah.
Okay.
We've tried to build a discipline of going, if we talk about a book, we put a link in chat. And I was actually talking to somebody last night who was watching and blames us for very expensive book habits.
Did you add the cleric quintet?
Sorry?
Did you add the cleric quintet yet?
No, I
Or
didn't add
RSL?
the cleric quintet, but
But you could.
And she said sometimes it's hard to actually get exactly the name of the book based on accents and things. So links are appreciated. And then she blamed me
Well,
because
you have the link now.
she watched one of our coffee clubs and then had to buy 4 books on the back of it. So
The cleric quintet has druids in it, and so it's also environmentally focused.
so Rebecca, I look forward to you posting the URL in the chat. Anybody can do it.
I don't know.
So Eric, it felt like you were about to segue, but before you segued, I wanted to check in. So we've been going about an hour. We can stay in it and take a segue and take a new journey, or we can go feels like the chat. I'm happy to stay in it because I always enjoy the chats, but
I wasn't really changing topics, just steering the topic a little bit.
We continuing? Stop, start, continue?
I'll have to
So-
stop soon, but that doesn't mean y'all can't keep going.
Eric, take us to the next.
So I was thinking, so there's two different questions I was exploring as you all were talking and I was reflecting. One is how to continue this theme of bringing sustainability and environmental care into the day-to-day for employees. And the other was around drifting towards the organizational sustainability conversation. And the first one, I was really playing with the parallels between built-in quality and built-in sustainability. And we already have this thing of built-in quality in the framework. And when you don't do that, you eat unexpected and high costs at an indeterminable point in the future when your systems go down, when your security is breached, and what have you. And I feel like environmental disaster or lack of care for the environment probably has a similar payoff curve or delay curve of that, only worse and more subject to unexpected regulatory things like, oh, yes, the cancer caused by this chemical we've been selling for 60 years when we didn't know about cancer is suddenly our liability. Might make you do a little bit more upfront care about the things you put in your products. But what the behaviors of built-in sustainability might be. How does that cascade all the way down to the individual team level, and how does it show up in a team that uses that in its products? And if I were just building a exact parallel to the existing content, what are the core practices of team level built-in sustainability as one way of looking at this problem? And I could start to do that from a product management point of view, an architectural point of view, a leadership and culture point of view. And I think many of the same change management approaches that we bring to the table for quality suddenly become much more relevant and introduce some new roles to people and some new ideas and so on. So that was where my brain was going, and that's about the extent of my thinking right there. I'm curious how that lands with people from a parallels in fitness.
I'm curious about, like, I love the thread of thinking, and you think built-in sustainability. But then I think there's also a question, do you go, should sustainability just become part of our quality standards? And so, and one of the things, that, let's say, I loved about Safe 6 was the introduction of the kind of built-in quality building blocks to, the evolution from once upon a time, built-in quality was here of Dean's favorite 8 XP practices, to now built-in quality is here's a set of building blocks to go, you've got foundational built-in quality, you've got software built-in quality, and so on and so forth, to go, if I'm this type of team, these are the building blocks that are probably relevant to the thinking wiring I've got to have about built-in quality. Is there an option there that you say, well, actually, you just add another building block to it all that says sustainability, and then you're wiring it in to go, you can't think about quality without thinking about sustainability?
I think there's a element of that, but there's also an element of the need to call things out and make them prominent until they are more common. So I could argue that DevOps and continuous delivery, continuous deployment, automated testing, all of that stuff just goes in as an element of built-in quality as well. And yet it needed to be much more visible for a good long while. I could argue that big data is just part of good engineering practice and data reuse at scale. But there's a need to make it more prominent while organizations aren't good at it.
I'll buy that.
So I think from
sorry, go.
So from a community change management point of view, like the entirety of the ecosystem, I think there is a need to make it a parallel for a while as opposed to just a part of.
Yeah, I'll buy that. Because one of the things I reacted to when Rebecca was early sharing about solution context was I was thinking, what if you don't bury this in solution context, because that's the best article nobody reads.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an even better article that nobody reads now, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think there's a few layers. Technically, the ethics of your organization are meant to be interwoven into the way that you manage your products and your solutions. So I look at it as like the same as everything else we coach, right? This should already be happening, and for some reason it isn't. Um, I think some of this is in relation to quality about being really open about um, how reuse, replacement, longevity, um, thinking about your impact once your product is out in the world is all a part of quality. Understanding, I think part of that, to your point in change management, is about education and understanding based off of the solution set or the solution context that you're in or what you're trying to build. Um, what do we need to be educated around as far as what things to be looking at for rethink and reuse and full product life cycle is very, I'm finding a lot of differences between software and hardware, and especially in the software world. Um, just things that I don't think people are educated on. Like, of course, going digital is going to have less of an imprint, right? But that's just not true if you've replaced the physical act of sending a letter with, instead, I'm just going to chat back and forth with you all day, which does have a very tiny imprint every single moment I say hi, which I never would have done if I was actually just putting a letter in a box. I'm not going to just send you a thing that says hi. So just the amount of transactions and interactions digitally doesn't necessarily mean that you've gone down because you've replaced something physical. And so what is the span of education that we need to make based off of the values that we have as an organization and understanding what user base we're trying to hit?
It
So
strikes
there's
me
two
that
thoughts. Go ahead, Michael.
is
Your turn.
sorry. It might not be, but I'll go. It strikes me that this, and it's could be obvious, but I'll go there anyway. Back to an earlier point, approaching this from a slightly different angle. This has to exist at multiple levels of abstraction in the organization. Just having it mentioned in one of your your strategic themes that, oh, by the way, we're trying to be sustainable. That's not going to pull this off. I mean, of course, it's good that it's there, and it's good that everyone can recognize that this is like deeply ingrained, for instance, in our culture as an organization now, and it's taken us a few years to get there, but we are there now. There's not a person who doesn't realize that this is a very real concern for how we make decisions. But that needs to filter all the way down to what people are doing day to day. And otherwise, it's just going to stay in that ethereal layer of, a well-intentioned statement that doesn't actually get acted upon. And I could see SAFE doing a lot of good here to try to help, much as we've done in terms of understanding requirements and how those requirements flow from that high level of abstraction, the initial direction, strategy, strategic themes, and so on, all the way down to the stories. And then, yes, the quality, the built-in quality. I think figuring out how to map sustainability into this space, I almost want to go out on a limb and say I'm not the first person on this call who's had this thought, given some of the great work that's going on that I'm not allowed to know about yet. But it's that occurred to me as something I wanted to put out there for you, that this need for it to operate at multiple levels of abstraction.
Then one of the hardest things actually as I started writing, because there was a moment when I started writing and I was like, I'm about to just explain everything that is safe already and just say the word sustainable a lot more. But I do think, to Eric's point, there's a reason to explain it, with this specific lens, so that people can start doing it more. Because it's, although you could take the idea that this is just like any other vision or strategy, and you need to be clear, and it needs to your point, have specificity within the layers. People do need that guidance and that view to be able to look holistically about, why, if this is so obvious, why is it not happening? If everybody in the world knows that this is a concern, why is it not happening? And what can we do? And what can we do day to day in the midst of urgency and whatever? So, yeah. Sorry. +1, +100.
One thing that Eric, you said that gave me an awful lot to think about was, could this in fact, and I thought I heard this, and I think you were saying this, could this simply, sustainability, it's just yet another characteristic of what it means to be building a quality solution. And if you know that that's what it is and what that looks like, that can be driven from an awful lot of activity at the coalface, so to speak, to try to make sure, now go and build that thing that has this, as well as all the other quality characteristics, now has sustainability woven into the heart of the thing, because it's very important for us. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
I think Mark gets credit for saying it's could just be another aspect, but for me, I'm saying it's parallel. But then I also look at what is the aspect-oriented slice of it across the entirety. Like, what's the role of an enterprise architect with regards to sustainability? What's the role of the chief product officer or the value stream manager with respect to it? What's the role of the business owner with respect to it? What's the role of finance with respect to it as they show up as part of portfolio operations? Like, you start to take a layered approach on it and looking across the framework, to your point, and it's like, okay, yeah, it's not just a theme. It's not just a slogan. It's something that I wouldn't recommend this, but it's like, okay, what's if it's, for one moment we look at it as if it was a virtual slice of the responsibility wheel for every single persona in the framework, what would that show up with? Now, obviously, we're not going to just go add more wedges to all the wheels, but like, what could it be? Is a wonderful thinking exercise for each and every role.
Mm.
So real quick, because I see everyone has thoughts.
And also, I want to
but when
highlight
you-
time that we're about to move into final round.
Yeah. But what Eric just said triggered a thought for me. What if it's a principle?
I'm going to
What
respond
if
to that.
it is?
No, you finish and then I'm going to respond.
Well, I mean, how else do you put something into everything else in the framework? Those 10 principles are the things that we live by that say, whatever practices you have, here's what should guide your thinking. Right? And isn't that what we have just spent the last hour saying we need to start doing with sustainability around product and business operations and transformation and every other aspect of running your business?
I mean, what if I said it already was?
You're just not necessarily conscious of it.
But organize around value was always a principle that wasn't a principle until 6.0, right?
So
Or 5.1. Doesn't matter.
There's a thread. And by the way, I just have to tell you, Eric, you just gave me a very geeky flashback to remembering when aspect-oriented programming was the new thing and how excited I got about it. But
oh, good. I'm glad you got the reference.
Yeah, boy, that was a while ago. I'm probably going to come back to Michael's comment about making it real. And, you know, I love the principle. I love principles-based thinking because principles are how you tune stuff and make it work in context. And yet the reality is, I think so much of what safe practices do is to go, here's how you start living the principle, because the principle can be a little bit too abstract to engage with. It's like a great idea, but what do I do with it? And I think when you look at practices and processes, you go, here's some practical things you could do with it. And then eventually you kind of master them enough that you can orient much more back towards the principle because it's no longer so distant you can't engage with it. And, you know, might it turn up as a principle? Well, maybe it should, right? From all the reasoning you had. But I think if you look more instantly, that sort of one of the things I've loved about this morning's discussion is just going back to, you know, anybody anywhere in the organization, what can I do with this, right? Our organization's environmental strategy is not somebody else's concern. It's how do I bring it to life in my job? And that's all very practical. So I don't know, maybe we just suggested that Rebecca doesn't need to write one new article. She's got to write 6 because she's got to update solution context, built-in quality, design thinking, and the desirability, viability, feasibility, and sustainability model, an extra safe principle, and
System thinking.
system syncing.
Well, Iter development. You get one first.
All right. I reckon we're at time. So let's go to closing thoughts for the wrap. Let's go in reverse order. Saahil and Michael, you've got least words in edgewise. So let's give you the beginning of the closing thought. Saahil, take it, pass it along.
I don't know that it's actually true that we have the least words, but I will say it has been so fun to be back in this space with you all. I'm really appreciating the mental stimulation that you provide, and these conversations have so much value to me. So that's my first thought, is just thank you so much for allowing me back in the club and giving me time for my back to heal. I think that we covered a very important topic. It's one that I'm very passionate about. I submitted a presentation on it to Berlin. I intend to submit another one in DC, because I want to make sure that we continue to talk about this. And I think that across everything we discovered, it's already there in everything that we're doing. And we can only be helped by making it more explicit. So I'm really excited that this is becoming a topic.
Thank you. Who are you passing it to?
I would say
I'm gonna pass it to Michael.
Sorry, did I miss the protocol? Is that how that works? I apologize.
I'm just making
that was new to me.
I'm making it up as I go along.
Mark said Saahil and Michael, so I assume Michael was going next.
I enjoyed this enormously. Very thought provoking. I might not sleep tonight now if I'm not careful. I need to go and chill out a little. There's one thing that came out from the conversation was just how pervasive this could be and probably should be, as we're all moving into some new place together. As Safe likes to say, like, well, we're building the future. So let's try to make that a friendly place and a welcoming place. And I'm going to sound horribly noble and not meaning to do that here, but really enjoyed this. Really appreciate you welcoming me back in, and hope to have more of these conversations. Thank you all so much.
Where are you passing the ball, Michael?
Oh gosh, Eric.
I'm just loving part 1 out of at least 7 on this topic. I mean, it's like 2 or 3 major different directions of conversation around this that we didn't even think start to open. And at least 2 of them involve cats. So I'll pass it to Rebecca.
Meow.
Thank you.
Is
And that was Mark. Okay.
There we go. Thank you, guys. I do appreciate it.
That was a really short closing word, Rebecca. Hold the cat up
Could
and
have
say
just
thank you.
meow.
You have been influencing. Eric and I had a moment the other day where I found myself providing hold music for him. So, your influence is spreading. But, so wrapping up, it's been awesome having old, new voices, new, old voices. Michael and Saahil back. Extra randomness is always fun. I must confess, when I glanced at should we talk about sustainability, I pictured an entirely different conversation, but really enjoyed this one. So I'm with Eric. I think there might be a few more sustainability discussions. If you've been watching, thanks for joining us. See you next week. See who turns up. We talk about sustainability again. Yeah.
See you next week.